I'll kind of begin. Welcome everyone who's joining. My name is Jen Rowe from the city of Boston, as chair of the Boston Region Metropolitan Planning Organization's TIP Process Engagement and Readiness Committee. I'm now going to call this meeting to order, and we'll read through our introductory notices and guidelines. So you are invited to participate in our transportation planning process, regardless of your race, color, national origin, including limited English proficiency, religion, creed, gender, ancestry, ethnicity, disability, age, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, veteran status, or background. This meeting is accessible to people with disabilities. Zoom products are compliant with exceptions with the following standards: Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.1, Level AA standards, and revised Section 508 standards. If you require any additional accommodations in order to participate fully in this meeting, or if you have any technical difficulties, please contact Adriana Jacobson of MPO staff at ajacobsen@ctps.org or 857-702-3663 or via the chat box. All participants will join the meeting with muted microphones. We do ask that you rename yourself, including your first name, last name, and affiliation. After the roll call, board members may mute and unmute themselves, but we do ask that folks remain muted unless actively speaking. To participate in the discussion, you'll use the raise hand function. Find this by clicking on the participants button at the bottom of the screen, and a window will pop up with the raise hand button at the bottom or in the reactions button in the toolbar. Then the chair, myself, will call on participants to speak. If you're on the phone, you can use the *9 to raise your hand. All right, so again, I'm Jen Rowe from the city of Boston. I chair this committee and represent Mayor Michelle Wu. I'll now call upon the other members of the committee, beginning with MassDOT seat 1.
Good afternoon. This is Chris Clem representing MassDOT seat 1.
Thanks, Chris. MassDOT seat 2. I don't think I remember.
I believe MassDOT seat 2 is here. John Bouchard is on vacation. It should be Tracy Lenhart filling in. Tracy, are you here?
I am here. Sorry, I couldn't unmute.
No worries. Thank you. MAPC.
Good afternoon, Eric Barrasso with MAPC.
Thanks, Eric. Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
Leonard Diggins, RTAC Council, RTAC here, Advisory Council here.
Thanks, Len. Town of Brookline.
Good afternoon, Erin Chute, representing Town of Brookline, and Chairperson Bernard Green.
Thanks, Erin. Town of Arlington.
This is John Alessi representing the Town of Arlington.
Thanks, John. Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Well, Tom and Brad. Tom Bent, City of Somerville, representing Mayor Ballantyne in the Inner Core. Brad?
Hi, everybody. Brad Rawson from Mayor Ballantyne's office here along with Tom. We serve as our 2 Inner Core reps. Thanks.
Have you both here. Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giametti representing Metro West.
Thanks, Dennis. Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination, Town of Acton. Not seeing Kristen here. Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Good afternoon, Tyler Tarasi representing Administrator Jim Neat for the Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Thanks, Tyler. All right, so I guess because we have a lot to go through today, I won't have everyone else who's here besides the members of the committee introduce themselves, but please do feel free to put your name and affiliation in the chat. Yeah, so I think we'll continue to an introduction. So thanks everyone for being here today. Ethan's going to walk us through some updates coming out of MassDOT's TIP readiness days and what they mean for the readiness scenario that sort of forms the baseline of how we go about programming the MPO's regional target funds. We're also going to take a look at some of the new project applications that staff have received, and then Ethan will sort of lay out what this all means for the types of decisions that we're likely to face this spring, summarize some information and policies that we already have in place to guide those decisions. And finally, this wouldn't be the TIPRA committee if we didn't also leave some time to consider whether there are changes we might need to make to our processes and policies to prepare for longer term picture before us. So with that, I'm gonna, we typically have a opportunity for public comment at the beginning of our meetings. That said, we do welcome folks who aren't members of the committee to contribute to discussion throughout. So there's no pressure to comment at this particular juncture. I guess with that, would anyone like to take this opportunity to comment? Right, I see Marzi Galaska.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you for the ability to comment or just to identify myself and our consultant. The town of Swampscott is on the 2028 TIP, and we request to continue its appropriation of funding, and hopefully a project will stay on the TIP. I understand that there might be some concerns about it. Dustin Kerswick from STV is on this call as well, and he and I will be more than happy to address any of the issues that the MPO might have at this time or when the time comes to talk about the project.
Great. Thank you so much for being here. I also see J.R. Frey.
Good evening, J.R. Fry, town engineer for the town of Hingham. And just wanted to bring to the committee's attention that the town of Hingham has provided a comment on the proposed draft. As Ethan has the opportunity to review that and review it with MassDOT, hopefully the town is hopeful that what we've presented is that the committee finds it favorable and we can maintain our position in the federal fiscal 26 TIP.
Thank you, JR. All right, is there any other comments from members of the public? All right, seeing none, let's move over onto our action item for the day. The approval of meeting minutes from December 19th. So yeah, is there anyone who would like to motion to approve this set of meeting minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve the December 19th meeting minutes.
Thank you, Eric. John.
I will second that motion.
Great. Let's we'll move into a roll call. Actually, before that, does anyone have any comments or questions about the meeting minutes before we move to vote? All right. Seeing none, I'll now call the roll. MassDOT seat 1.
MassDOT seat 1, yes.
MassDOT seat 2.
MassDOT seat 2, yes.
MAPC.
MAPC, yes.
Regional Transportation Advisory Council.
TAC, Leonard Diggins, yes.
Town of Brookline.
Brookline, yes.
Town of Arlington.
John Alessi, yes.
Inner Core Committee, City of Somerville.
Somerville, Brad Roslin, yes.
Metro West Regional Collaborative, City of Framingham.
Dennis Giambetti, yes.
Minuteman Advisory Group on Interlocal Coordination. Did we have Kristen join? I'm not seeing, so we'll skip her. Metro West Regional Transit Authority.
Tyler Tarasi, yes.
Wonderful. And Genro for City of Boston, yes. Wonderful, thank you. All right, we'll now I'm gonna move over to the main body of the meeting, and I'll pass it over to Ethan to deliver his presentation.
Thank you, Jen. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ethan Lapointe. I'm the Transportation Improvement Program Manager, also joined by Adriana here to provide an update on the readiness situation for projects that are both currently funded in the TIP and also some of the ones that are looking to get funded during this coming TIP development cycle. I want to start off, with this meeting by indicating that this is just an initial discussion on project readiness. We're going to be covering similar topics and a lot of very similar content at next week's MPO meeting. I'd like to focus this meeting on discussing a lot of the challenges and issues here and devising and coordinating on potential solutions to these challenges. We're not going to settle this all in this meeting or even next meeting. This is just the start of a multi-month journey towards developing a programming scenario for the 2026 to 2030 TIP. So with that, if we can go on to the next slide, and then the one after that for a presentation overview. There is, again, a lot of information that's going to be presented in this meeting. We'll start off by reviewing some of what we had previewed to members of this committee back on December 19th. So some of this information I'm going to be talking about today was already forewarned there. I'll also cover what materials were made available for this meeting and how you can navigate and read them. There's different legends and guides to follow. And also some background on exactly what MassDOT's TIP Readiness Days is and then how it informs the MPO's process for determining readiness dates on projects. Then going into the meat of the presentation, which is really the actual readiness recommendations and changes by year for federal fiscal years 2025 through 29. We will separately then have a stage at the end where each of our long LRTP or major infrastructure projects that are utilizing advanced construction funding will be indicated at the end. Because these are larger scale projects with larger dollar amounts, we want to call them out separately, as I also expect that there may be some discussion on these. And of course, there will also be embedded throughout this presentation, really, some comparisons to what we did last year for federal fiscal year 2025 to 29 TIP development, where the stats really look like, have strategies worked thus far, et cetera. And then, of course, culminating in discussion. As the chair mentioned earlier in their remarks, there are opportunities, and I do welcome committee members to ask questions as we go, because there will be a lot of information, especially once we get into the readiness changes by year. So to review the December 19th meeting, going on to the next slide and the one after that, please. Back on December 19th, this committee met and previewed some of the changes to 4 projects in federal fiscal year 2026, which will be reiterated here today. These were projects that staff had received early warning flags on from meetings with MassDOT and that we were monitoring as potential delay risks. And I'll say up front that these 4 projects are recommended for delay out of federal fiscal year 2026. We also, at that meeting, gave an advanced look at what the impact of advanced construction funding would be, or AC funding, on certain projects that are funded across multiple years of the TIP, specifically looking at our long-range plan projects with long-term funding obligations for the next few years. We also previewed what expected application volumes were going to look like for federal fiscal year 26 to 30 because we were in the middle of the project application period for this TIP cycle. If we go on to the next slide, on that topic of expected application volumes, this is a slide that I presented back on December 19th and showed a graph where I said at that meeting that compared to 3 projects, or really 4 projects if you include some transit transformation last year, for the 2025 to 29 TIP, we were expecting around 7 applications. What has happened, on the next slide, please, is we have received 10 project applications for the federal fiscal years 2026 to 2030 TIP, which is higher than we saw for the federal fiscal years 24-28 TIP. We're not back to the early years or pre-COVID levels of applications yet, but these 10 applications don't include the 11 that we have for transit transformation and the additional 7 that we have for community connections. The point here is that application volumes are quickly rebounding, and more than that, among these 10 applicants, none of these projects were part of our project design pilot either. So there's still additional energy, as it were, to add more projects into this list of potential applicants. I'll also note here that because MPO staff had identified certain financial risks and also had initially seen some heavy interest in the program, more so than other years, specifically interest that was exceeding our anticipated funding availability for new projects. In meeting with different municipalities about projects they may have wanted to advance, some municipalities that did have projects that could have applied to the TIP this year opted not to apply after MPO staff provided some of that information around project readiness and also funding availability as well. That was about 3 or 4 projects, I believe, that then either backed out after an application was indicated or interest was indicated, or opted not to pursue it after a discussion was had with MPO staff. So again, there is a lot more potential for growth in these application figures than we're already seeing here. Going on to the next slide, I will briefly provide an overview of the 10 applications we have received and where they are standing. These projects will be covered in detail at the March 6th MPO meeting as we look to discuss and provide or indicate the final scores that these projects will receive. Scoring remains very much underway for these projects, and these projects are listed here in alphabetical order from each of the applicants. We have a project that is within the Complete Streets program from the town of Bolton, which is the reconstruction of Route 117. The town recently completed a meeting with District 3 and other parties within our MassDOT Highway District 3 and other parties within MassDOT alongside MPO staff for their pre-25% design checklist submission. The City of Cambridge has also submitted an application for a bicycle and pedestrian network project for an overpass over the MBTA's Fitchburg line in Dennehy Park. Some members of this committee may remember that was a design pilot applicant from last year, though that applicant backed out of the pool after receiving a federal discretionary grant. The town of Concord has also submitted a multi-use trail bridge project, and it expects that after some geotechnical work is resolved over these coming weeks to submit a 25% design in March. There's a 25% design prepared by the City of Everett for their reconstruction of Vine and 3rd Street that has not been submitted to MassDOT yet. And the town of Lexington has actually submitted an application for a project that is listed on the MPO's long-range plan for the reconstruction of Hartwell Avenue and Bedford Street. The town expects to have the 25% design for this project in Q2 or Q3 of this calendar year. I'd also note as well, just this slide is showing cost estimates from applicants that include a combination of ones indicated by their consultant based on these anticipated 25% design estimates or project cost estimates that are based on the figures available in MassDOT's project info system. Generally, whichever one is more recent or is a higher estimate is what is indicated here. In the case of this Lexington project, it is worth noting that because this is a long-range transportation plan project, that $46.2 million is unlikely to be funded in a single tip year, and like many of our LRTP projects, would be AC'd across multiple years, likely starting with $10 million in the first federal fiscal year of its funding. The next 5 projects, and again, just in alphabetical order here, is the Village Street Bridge Replacement Project in Marblehead, also with an anticipated 25% design submission coming in March. The town of Melrose has a Lebanon Street Improvement Project application that is currently at a project review committee approval stage. The MPO staff have been working closely with the town's consultant to identify when the 25% design submission for that project is. I believe they're currently looking towards Q3 or Q4 of this calendar year for that. The town of Needham for the reconstruction of Highland Avenue, which has a 25% design expected December 2025. Also worth noting that this project is the second phase of a project that the MPO previously funded on Highland Avenue in Newton. So this is a continuation, and I believe we actually previewed this project back during the annual meeting that the MPO had a few months back. The City of Newton has also applied for their own project, also near that Highland Ave project, for a replacement of a bridge on Christina Street in partnership with DCR, with a 25% design expected in fall of 2026, and a recent pre-25% checklist meeting completed with MassDOT back in January. We actually then have a 75% design project from the town of Wenham for a safety improvement project on Route 1A. So bottom line here is that we do have a fair number of project applicants this year that have spent the last few years advancing their designs, which will come up later in this meeting as part of consistency with the MPO's own project cost policy initiatives. And we will have more information on these projects, include anticipated scopes of work at a coming meeting. I just wanted to mention these up front so that way folks keep them in mind over the coming weeks and months. Also, MPO staff are happy to answer any questions the committee may have at any point as we continue to evaluate these projects. So, on that note of things that may come up over the coming weeks and months, if we can go on the next slide, let's go into materials for this meeting and the projects we already have on the tip. So the readiness scenario, which is really just the list of anticipated changes to projects currently funded in the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 tip, is currently available on the meeting calendar for this meeting, and we've also emailed it to all members of the tip committee and MPO board for reference. I will note this scenario that we are reviewing here today is identical to the one that we'll be presenting at the MPO meeting next week. So there will not be any changes to this document made as a result of discussions here today. However, discussions will follow after the MPO board meeting. To kind of go through how this very large table with many different columns is laid out on the next slide, unlike previous years of providing a readiness scenario, projects are sorted in order of their current programmed year. They used to be sorted in order of their project ID number. So projects on this list or table start in federal fiscal year 2025 and go down all the way to 2029. We've also added some new columns and information for reference that were not previously included in scoring scenarios. This includes the initial tip year and tip for each projects. What this means is it says when was the first time a project was incorporated on a tip and in what year was the project initially funded. Using that information and also some additional information from project info, namely the public-facing version that just shows design submission milestones, not specific permit submissions. We also have a column that shows and calculates the number of years it has been since MassDOT had entered a design milestone update in project info. Again, it's important to note this doesn't mean if you see a project that, let's say, has 5 years since its last project info update, that does not mean it has not made progress in those 5 years. It just means that a new design threshold has not been attained. So for example, it has not gone from project review committee approval to 25% or 25% to a design public hearing or 75%. This is meant to be one way of assessing the risk for a cost increase. That is what MPO staff primarily believe this may be a helpful proxy for. Generally speaking, the greater number of years since a submission on project info, the higher the risk. As again, generally speaking, my understanding of the situation is that these design submissions dictate what the cost estimate that is listed on project info, which determines how MPO staff program projects in our eSTIP system is calculated. So, just moving then onto our legend for the next slide. There is color coding throughout the materials for this readiness scenario. There are different both text colors and cell colors, but starting off with text colors, if you see a project description that is in orange, that is a project with a moderate risk flag. A project description that is in red indicates a project that is a high risk flag. It is worth noting if you see a cost figure that is listed in red, so it's any of the middle columns within the spreadsheet, that indicates a cost increase beyond a certain threshold, either at $2.5 million or 25% of a project's cost. Again, that's consistent with the TIP Cost Change Committee's recommendations. To explain what we mean by risk here, MPO staff have classified generally projects into 3 types of risk. Readiness risk refers to a project that may be at risk but is not currently recommended for a change in meeting its ad year. So it could be, for example, a project that has a late quarter advertisement date but may have certain permits that could take longer to file than expected, or permitting issues that haven't been fully identified yet, for example, like a Coast Guard permit. Cost risk is related, but could be a variety of things. This could be a project that has a very high budget, but is otherwise on track for readiness. It could mean, though, that a project has not had a cost estimate in some years, and therefore it has a cost risk because there's an anticipation that its budget could increase substantially due to how old that estimate is. A combination of these 2 factors is what we are referring, or what MPO staff are referring to as program risk. It could be a larger scale project that is on track to meet all of its milestones, but because it has a large amount of funding in 1 year of the TIP or even across multiple years of the TIP, if that project were to see a delay or any issues could come up, it would substantially alter not only its own project status, but the status of other projects in its own or other programming years as it moved. Program risk is something that we'll talk about for a couple projects here, but is most common and is generally almost always going to apply to some extent to any projects on the MPO's long-range plan. If a project is more than $50 million, any change to that project schedule is likely to be very disruptive to projects in its midst. Moving on to the next slide, we then get into the actual changes. If you see a white cell for a project, that means that there is no recommended change. Red cells indicate that projects are recommended to be delayed a year. Green cells, which are absent from this spreadsheet, indicate that a project would be accelerated by 1 or more years. And a blue cell indicates that there is a new project or line item for consideration in the program. For purposes of this spreadsheet, there are no green cells. There is one blue cell that is tentatively showing a new set aside for design funding in future TIP years. I'm happy to talk about that during the discussion period, but I will not be going into detail on that as part of this presentation. So happy to field questions later, but yes, there is a new line item in this readiness scenario that sets aside money for design funding. Now, moving on to our last piece of material for this presentation before we really get into the readiness updates. We've also reattached the TIP project cost change policy memo all the way back from an MPO meeting in September of 2021. These committee recommendations were not only provided here for general availability by members of this committee, but also to both reiterate the importance of these policies and their applicability to these challenges that we're seeing in TIP scenarios. In fact, if you read these committee recommendations, a lot of the recommendations include language that basically called this shot 4 years ago, but also in advance of next week's MPO board meeting, in which MPO staff will focus a little bit more on the policy side of ways to address these challenges and less so on the specific design scopes or other specific readiness changes that are being presented here today. So in a sense, basically providing some homework and recommending that members of this committee and also members of the MPO board just give a quick overview or a quick read through of these cost change recommendations. Generally speaking, I specifically encourage review of sections 3 and 4 of the memo, as the other two sections 1 and 2 have actually already had some measures put in place to enforce them. 3 and 4, not as much to date. Now, with that, we can start moving into content for Readiness Days and talking at a high level as to what Readiness Days is. On the next slide, TIP Readiness Days is an annual multi-day meeting of MassDOT staff with each of the Commonwealth's MPOs. MassDOT's Readiness Days team solicits information from several different sections, both within MassDOT and also from each of the MPOs. This includes comments from the MPO, comments from MassDOT's program managers, MassDOT's highway districts, the right-of-way section, the environmental section, and then the director's office, which with all of the information provided from each of these parties combined, generally leads to a synthesis of information that then drives the recommended readiness year for the project. It's worth noting that Readiness Days this year primarily focused around a readiness, or I should say, a recommended readiness year for each project, and not necessarily any cost increases yet for most projects. With that said, all of the projects that are listed in the readiness scenario do include the latest cost estimates that staff were able to pull from project info as of last week. So we do have everything that is up to date as far as what is in the database, but it is worth noting that Readiness Days is primarily a readiness exercise, and cost information will become available over the coming weeks. And staff will adapt and present information on scenarios accordingly as new information comes to light. If we go on to the next slide, I would like to note that we are doing some things differently this year than we have previously done with TIP Readiness Days. So in prior years, MPO staff have usually taken the information from Readiness Days in a more reactive way, which has left members of the MPO board and also the TIP committee with less time to adjust to and devise strategies around anticipated project delays. There's two key adaptations for this year. First are the quarterly readiness updates. TIP Readiness Days is technically one of these quarterly readiness updates, but back in December, we were able to leverage that meeting to at least preview some of this information and not only begin strategizing around ways to potentially resolve certain readiness issues for some projects, but also telegraph financial information to project proponents to better allow them to build their applications around that. Specifically, any applicants for the transit transformation investment programs so that MPO staff could ensure that if there was a funding surplus in the near years of the TIP, there would be fully scored projects to utilize that funding surplus, which I am hopeful that we will be able to accomplish this year as we continue scoring all of those projects. Moreover, we then had the sub-regional readiness days. So historically, MPO staff have always been able to provide comments for TIP readiness days, but this year MPO staff used these new sub-regional readiness days, which we conducted in partnership, and thanks in large part to some of the solicitations and invitations sent by MAPC staff through their own sub-regional communications, to gather more information from project proponents so that MPO comments to MassDOT reflected the perspective of the proponents to MassDOT. By more proactively working with staff at MassDOT and also talking with project proponents, MPO staff are hopeful that this has made the scenario planning process for this TIP development cycle have fewer surprises in it and allow us to demonstrate and incorporate some countermeasures earlier. It is worth noting, of course, that I'm emphasizing on this slide the word fewer and not no surprises. There is some information that is new to MPO staff as of TIP readiness days and that we were not aware of prior, but because it is less than prior years, we can work to address that a little bit more efficiently, we believe. To kind of look back on the next slide, this next slide is a table that showed what the 2025 to 29 TIP development outlook looked like this time last year, back on February 9th of 2024. I'm not going to go into the details of all the numbers on the screen here. The bottom line is that in last year's TIP, the first 2 years of the TIP include a very large surplus of funding due to systemically broad project delays out of fiscal 25 and fiscal 26, most of which compounded in fiscal 27 and 8. That was a net surplus of about $100 million in 25 and 26, and a net deficit of about $106 million in 27 and 28. On the next slide, this shows a very high-level overview of what we're looking at for not only the 26-30 TIP development years, but also 2025. I'm going to make this a lot easier to read on the next slide if we can go to that one. That prior slide was meant just more to show consistent format, but this slide shows that currently, due to anticipated delays, which I'll be getting into shortly, in federal fiscal year 2025, we're currently looking at what we believe is a $24.6 million surplus of funding, meaning that the unprogrammed funding balance of a year that is not currently within the next TIP development window has about $25 million left to be programmed. And this is the result of a fairly sizable number of our 25 projects being delayed into 26. Despite that, we've also seen a very large number of 26 projects being delayed, which has led to a $65.3 million surplus in that year, or 52.1% of overall available target funding in that year. Similar to last year's TIP development cycle, though with some key differences, this combination of project delays not only from the first year of the new TIP, but the first year of the current TIP, when I say that, I mean the current TIP being 25-29, have led to a logjam of projects in 2027. We have about $240 million worth of projects that are currently sitting in 2027 based on this readiness scenario, which is a deficit of about $84.7 million in that year, or negative 55.5% of our overall funding. We have a smaller amount of a deficit in 2028. That's just due to one project delay in that year, and also because we had a very low unprogrammed balance going into this TIP cycle in 28, as we had tried to resolve that deficit last year. To go into the specific drivers of these changes, we'll start with 2025 on the next slide, and then moving on to the next slide. So in developing last year's TIP, or I should say the current TIP, 2025 to 29, there were no projects at readiness days that were indicated to be falling out of 2024 into 2025. It is worth noting there was a project this past summer that, due to a utilities issue with a sewer, did get delayed via a TIP amendment into federal fiscal year 2025. But at least at this stage of TIP development, we did not have that indication. During this year's TIP development for the 2630 TIP, again, we have 3 projects in fiscal 25 that we're projecting to be delayed into 2026. And with these projects, we're anticipating that they amount to about $31 million in overall cost. These projects are on the next slide. A multi-use path construction of Independence Greenway at Interstate 95 and Route 1 in Peabody. I will note this is distinct from a project on the next slide. There are 2 Independence Greenway projects in Peabody. This project, however, is one that constructs some bridges over Interstate 95 and underneath Route 1. The other one is more of a traditional path project. This project's cost has increased by 58%. From about $14 million to $22 million, reflecting a new 100% design estimate that was attained in February 2025. Part of the reason why this project was tagged for risk and also delayed was because of that sewer monitoring that the other section of the rail trail was looking at earlier this year. And due to delays, the project would likely be looking at a Q1 fiscal 26. It is worth noting here that for both this project and the next one, MPO staff have met with these project proponents, and the project proponents have indicated that they would prefer to be programmed within federal fiscal year 2026. The reason being is that because this project now has a $22 million budget, it is unlikely that if it held a fairly risky position in Q4 of 2025, that if it did in fact slip into 2026 after we had developed this TIP, that there would be funding able to act as a safety net for it and ensure it could remain funded should there be a readiness change. I'm happy to explain that further because I think my language there was a little bit clumsy, but a very similar situation is also the case here for the shared use path at the Wellington Underpass in the city of Medford. This project also recently received a 100% design back in late October of 24 and actually saw a small cost decrease of about 9.5%. This project is also being proposed for delay to about Q1 fiscal 26 for its advertisement due to some unknowns currently about the boardwalk component of this project with regard to potentially needing to obtain a new permit for Coast Guard regulations in addition to some other environmental permits as part of this project. So very similar to the Independence Greenway project, this was a project that could aggressively potentially stay in Q4 of fiscal 25, but if that concern turned out to be true this time in the summer, we would be very unlikely to have sufficient funding available to capture that delay via a TIP amendment, which is why, as part of this readiness recommendation, those 2 projects are recommended for delay into 26. The third project is one that has actually been presented before. This project was already delayed via a TIP amendment that was recently presented to the MPO board. This is the intersection reconstruction at Route 3 and Bedford Road in the city of Woburn. And the delay is the result of some work around drainage in the project area and is currently looking at a spring federal fiscal year 26 add date. The 75% for this project is also currently still being worked out. It's a fair few months overdue there. We do have 2 projects as well in fiscal 25 that are tagged for risk. If we can go on to those. The first project is more of I'd say low to moderate risk for permitting. This is the other section of the Independence Greenway in Peabody, which is more of a trails project than a direct trails and bridge project. This is the project that I mentioned previously was delayed out of fiscal 24 into 25 by TIP amendment this past, I believe, September. Might be incorrect there on the month, but the city of Peabody currently believes that the project can still meet a July of 2025 advertisement date with a 100% design submission expected over the coming weeks here. MassDOT is continuing to work with the city on utilities there, I believe with regard to force accounts that still need to be worked out between the city as far as when potential repairs would happen, though the city currently believes that the condition of the sewer underneath the trail does not need to be addressed immediately as part of this trail project. The other project is tagged here more for a cost risk, but also a scope change flag. This is the reconstruction on Route 38 from Route 62 to the Woburn City line in the town of Wilmington. This is a MassDOT proponent project as well. I'll just note, based on the asterisk, so this is not the proponent being the town of Wilmington. This project is at 100% design, and last year, sort of late in tip development, there was a 57.8% cost increase on the project due to a change in scope to incorporate a bridge replacement. I don't know if at the time MPO staff were fully aware of the bridge replacement scope or I conveyed that, though we have a little bit more confirmation there. The project is still moving along and is still anticipated to meet a fiscal 25 add date, though there is a little bit of uncertainty with regard to environmental permits on the project. Primary driver of risk here is that $37.5 million estimated cost right now. Because of how large this project is in its cost, it is unlikely there would be sufficient target funding in fiscal 26 to capture it, but the permitting situation is not so difficult right now to warrant a delay into 26 to defend against that. Excuse me. So those are the 25 projects. I'm going to move into 2026, though if any folks have questions on the 25s, I'm happy to answer them as we go. But moving into 26, this is the bulk of the information on readiness. So I'll take a step back here and kind of add some context as to how this year's year one of the new tip compares to prior years. When we were developing the 24-28 tip, looking at projects in the 23-27 tip and seeing who was changing, the projects that were in federal fiscal year 24, about 4 of those were delayed into 25. When we were then looking at the 25-29 tip and reflecting on the projects that had been moved into 25 or were still in 25, 6 of the 9 projects there were proposed for delay into 2026 or later. It's worth noting that of those 6, 3 out of those 6 had been previously delayed in the 2024 to 28 tip. Those 3 projects being the rehabilitation of Cherry Street and the grade crossings in Ashland, the reconstruction of Boylston Street in the city of Boston, and the rehabilitation of Essex Street in the city of Lynn. Going into this new tip development for federal fiscal years 26 to 30, 7 out of 9 projects in federal fiscal year 26 are looking at delays now. 4 of these 7 projects were previously delayed when we were developing the 25-29 tip last year, and 2 of those, being the Boylston Street project in Boston and the Essex Street project in Lynn, had also been delayed in the 24-28 tip development process. The other 2 projects proposed here for delay out of 26 are the Route 3A reconstruction project in Hingham and the Broadway reconstruction project in the city of Chelsea. If we can then go on to the next slide just to go through this. These next 4 projects here for federal fiscal year 26, I want to reiterate, these are the 4 projects that were flagged for readiness concerns back at the December 19th meeting of this committee, being the intersection improvement at Route 1 and University Ave and Everett Street in Norwood. Worth noting here, this project has a cost estimate of $27.6 million. However, there's 2 key risks to also consider for the project. For one, the latest design submission that is listed in project info was a revised 25% design submitted back in January of 2021. Based on readiness days, MPO staff are also now aware that there is a large twin culvert or a double barrel culvert being incorporated into the project, which will also likely lead to a cost increase here. So MPO staff are looking closely to identify when a new cost estimate will appear for this project, especially considering it is currently at 25%. I will also note this project is also listed in the MPO's long-range transportation plan because it is a capacity modifying project with some turn lane additions, I believe, at least based on the most recent scope that we have in the tip description. I mentioned the improvements on Boylston Street project in Boston earlier. This project is also still at a 25% design based on a resubmission from back in January 2021, as the 75% design submission for the project has been delayed due to some ongoing coordination needs that the city is trying to conduct with the Department of Conservation and Recreation, specifically around the intersection of Park Drive and Ipswich Street in the project. That part of the project had been incorporated into the scope after 2019 when there were some fatalities, or I believe at least one fatality at the intersection that led to its incorporation there for some vulnerable road user crashes. Based on some discussions with the city, MPO staff have indicated that there are currently versions of the project, the most expensive of which would be about $15 million versus a current $8.67 million estimate based on any new design submissions that may be attained. So we are currently in this scenario assuming the higher end of the cost estimates, which are still inclusive of that DCR owned asset. at $15 million. There are, however, other versions of this project, especially whether or not they do incorporate that DCR section, that would likely be less. That is a net increase of about 73.1% in overall cost, or $6.3 million. The next project is in Milford for the rehabilitation of Route 16 from Route 109 to Beaver Street. This project had a 25% design with a second resubmission back in October 2023, but does require a third submission of its 25%, and will also, when it goes to 75%, need some additional environmental permits that are still to be determined. Because that is still an incoming 25% design resubmission, we also do not have a revised cost estimate for this project yet either. And also for the rehabilitation of Essex Street and Lynn, this project still is not at 25% and is still at Project Review Committee approval, which it attained back in December of 2018. MassDOT is still waiting on a 25% design to identify permitting issues and right-of-way plans for the project. And so we are also tagging it as one that is not only proposed for delay during this TIP, but depending on how design progresses, is at risk for delay in future years of the TIP. Also worth noting that this project is being tagged for a high cost risk as well, due to anticipated or when we developed the 2025 to 29 TIP last year, there were already some concerns of the possibility for future delays of the project. So when we developed last year's TIP, MPO staff had advised that we utilize advanced construction to spread the project's funding out across 2 years. With this project's delay into fiscal 27, the full project cost of about $20 million, based on that current estimate, is proposed for programming in 27 here. So the net shift out of 26 is $10 million out of 26, dropping into 27 for that full $20 million cost estimate, as it had been spliced in half. Moving on to the remaining 26 projects. These are 3 that were not tagged back in December. The first is a MassDOT proponent project within the city of Chelsea that is a safety improvements project and related work on Broadway from William Street to City Hall Avenue. I'll also note here that this project was a fill-in project from MassDOT from the 24-28 TIP, where it was incorporated in fiscal 26. This project does still have some ongoing right-of-way title work and utility work in the project area. The utility work is being conducted by the City of Chelsea, and the execution of this project is dependent on the completion of that utility work. It's also worth mentioning, as I will get to later, that this is not the only project within the City of Chelsea that's proposed for delay. There are 2 other projects in the statewide highway program in 26, one being a bridge contract, the other one being a Safe Routes to School contract, that are proposed for delay into fiscal 27. Due to the limited geographic area of the city of Chelsea, the city is currently evaluating whether or developing a prioritization of what projects should also then stay in 27, or if some of these projects should be delayed further back beyond 1 year. Excuse me. For the next project in Hingham, as JR mentioned earlier, MPO staff received a letter last night from Hingham's select board, which we will make sure is available to members for review in advance of the February 20th MPO meeting. It's with regard to the improvements on Route 3A from Otis Street, and also a rotary, Rockland Street, and George Washington Boulevard. This project had a 75% design comments revision back in April of last year when we were still developing the TIP, and has recently indicated a new cost estimate increase from $28.7 million to $33.2 million, increase about 15.6%. It is worth noting that the cost had also increased by about 91% during the development of last year's TIP after the 25% design was submitted and the project reached 75% design. Now, I mentioned that letter earlier because the town does, in its letter, based on my review so far, go into a fair bit of detail about the specific utility coordination needs that have warranted that staff have at least flagged this project as a high risk. Given the project is now looking at a $33 million cost estimate, similar to one of the other projects in fiscal 25 that I indicated earlier, staff are currently looking to see if whether or not holding it in 26 is viable. One of the concerns here is that due to the large size of this project, if something were to happen that would shift this project into 27, it would break fiscal constraint in fiscal 27 as we continue to develop the TIP, or if we were to be developing the TIP, or once we had, I should say, backing up and slowing down a little. Once a TIP is endorsed, if during the summer we realize that it may be difficult to meet fiscal 26, this project may then cause a significant deficit issue if it had to move into 27 due to its size. So this delay recommendation is a combination of both trying to mitigate and understand risk, but also trying to be proactive here. And we're going to continue working with MassDOT District 5 in the town to get more information and see if we can get a more refined understanding of where this project will reliably fall. And then for our 7th and final project for delay out of 26, this is the intersection improvement at Willard Street and Richiuti Drive project. This was newly added to the TIP last year after an application. It had a resubmission of its 75% design back in June after endorsement, which has incorporated a cost increase on the project from 1.88 million to 3.7 million. This is technically a 96% cost increase. And is also proposed for delay because as borings were being conducted in the project area, they found a hollow concrete chamber. And because we are currently in the middle of winter, there are permits that will need to be obtained and excavation cannot begin until the ground thaws and we are in the spring. The 100% design for this project is also likely overdue as a result of this. Okay, so closing out 26 on the next slide, just with some risks. These are two projects that were just MPO staff are closely monitoring. Because of anticipated delays in fiscal 27, MPO staff are consolidating what is currently funding that is AC'd or using advanced construction between 26 and 7, all into fiscal 26 for the Belmont Community Path Phase 1 project. This has the project's budget at about $19.7 million lump sum in 2026. The town is still working on submitting their 75% design submission, and there were some design changes that have been since resolved due to coordination with the MBTA on a tunnel that is included for the project in terms of improving access to nearby schools. I will note MPO staff did receive a very large number of comments from abutters and also neighbors in the project area that were expressing support for the project, I believe organized from the Friends of the Belmont Community Path. We'll have more information on specific project comments and public comment updates at next week's meeting. But MPO staff are monitoring this closely as there is also some additional need for MBTA inspectors to be available when this project advertises to ensure they can do so in a timely manner. As a result of a 100% design on the intersection improvement at Boston Post Road and Wellesley Street in Weston, we're also monitoring a cost increase on this project from 3.2 million to 4.1 million, about 27.4%. This is actually an interesting case of risk because the risk tag is not as a possibility for delay, but actually acceleration. MPO staff are not sure right now. We've met with the town, though the town is experiencing some staff turnover after this week. The project is currently on track to make 26, though there are some bullish parties, I'd say, that believe it could also make 2025 potentially as an acceleration. We are monitoring this closely. I'm not entirely, at least as MPO, as program manager, willing to recommend this for an acceleration at this time, but it is an option. With that, we can now move into 2027. Starting off, 27 has a much lower than usual level of project delay. There is only one project during this readiness update that is recommended currently to shift. When we were developing the 24-28 TIP, 3 out of the 8 projects that were in year 2, in that case 2025, were recommended for delay. In the 25-29 TIP, 5 of the 8 projects were recommended for delay. 4 of those 5 projects are still holding their position in fiscal 27 as part of this TIP. I mention that in part because, well, I'll get to that on a later slide, but just moving on to this one project, if we go there. This is the, on the next slide, please, reconstruction of Route 30 project, which is currently still sitting at a 25% design public hearing as of September 2022, and the cost is the same. As a result of some delays in obtaining design funding from town meeting, which were resolved back in May of last year, there are some lingering design issues with regard to contracting with the consultant that I believe have all been ironed out to date, but those delays are still continuing along the entirety of the project's schedule. The municipality did successfully obtain all their necessary remaining design funding to continue advancing the project, but the project does need a new schedule that accounts for some of that lag between when they did have the funding to continue design. Since then, there have also been some indications of wetlands concerns that need to be addressed along and near the project area. And I will note for those who follow any housing news that the town recently obtained approval on a 40B development that has a fair number of units near South Avenue, which is in this project area as well. So MPO staff have been in touch with the town of Weston just to make sure that as this project continues to develop, that the scope of work reflects any of the needs of this new fairly sizable development in the project area. So going on the next slide to kind of expand upon what I was just saying on the prior slide. So there is a project that we have tagged for risk here, and that is the McGrath Highway Reconstruction Project, which again, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, will be noted in its own section with the other LRTP projects later. And again, most of that project's risk at this time is financial, though there are some scope elements. I mentioned earlier again that about 5 of 8 projects were delayed out of this year, last year. There is a notably low volume of project delay recommendations in this year and also a very low indicator of project cost revisions. There are still a few projects sitting in fiscal 27, even after this recommendation, that are not at 25% design. Something I want to emphasize here is that because we do not have these new cost estimates, because in some cases MassDOT can only make a recommendation if they have sufficient information based on a project schedule to do so, no news is not always good news, so MPO staff are monitoring this very closely. There is some good news here, but we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch, as it were. Moving into 28, this is a year that has most of their projects, or I should say more projects, tagged for risk. And in this case, sort of to the tune of what happened in 27, neither of the delays that are being proposed for the 2 projects in fiscal 28 are delays that are being the result, I should say, of recommendations by MassDOT. One delay was recommended by the project proponent, the other from MPO staff. On the next slide, the project proponent that recommended delay was the City of Boston for the reconstruction of Rutherford Avenue, based on a revised schedule from their consultant that indicates a 25% design in December of 2025. We'll discuss this in more detail on a later slide, but right now MassDOT are just looking to revise, or I should say review, that new schedule to determine what necessary permits are required for the project and also evaluate right-of-way concerns. MPO staff, I've had some preliminary phone calls with staff from the City of Malden, but have also been looking at the Spot Pond Brook Greenway project in the city. This project is still at a 25, or I should say at a Project Review Committee approved status after being on the tip for about 2 years now. The project is being recommended for delay out of federal fiscal year 28 to 29, based on some changes that are some persistent issues with regard to staff turnover and advancing the project since. Even with regard to its own readiness and permitting, the project also involves and intersects with some Article 97 land in the project area, which may make project delivery complex. Over the past year as well, some additional priorities have emerged for the City of Malden that may change the prioritization landscape for which projects should be executed first. And so staff are trying to work with both MassDOT and the city on identifying where these priorities lie accordingly. So with that, on the next slide, we can then look at our project risks. We have 5 of these for federal fiscal year 28. Most of these are cost risk. Excuse me. So this first row is actually out of date. This is the rehabilitation of Washington Street for the town of Brookline. It says that there was Project Review Committee approval back on September 2020, but I believe as of less than 48 hours ago, the town approved a 25% design to submit to MassDOT. So congratulations to the town of Brookline there. The project budget is in this tip recommended for consolidation. Instead of ACing it between federal fiscal year 28 and 29, MPO staff are recommending that it is consolidated to about 29 million all in for 28. Again, the town has just submitted a revised 25%. They are currently, based on their schedule, looking at a Q4 fiscal 28 add date. And given the project's budget, that is why there is a high risk tag here, as Q4 28 is likely subject to change over future tip cycles. Excuse me. This next project in Natick does not actually have a risk tag on the spreadsheet. This is the Cochituate Rail Trail extension and Natick Center connection for the MBTA station accessibility project. This project recently achieved a 25% back in September and has had a cost increase as a result from $7.5 to $11.5 million, or 53%. We're mostly flagging this for that cost increase, though it is worth noting one of the projects that the MBTA has applied for transit transformation funding for is their Natick Center Station Accessibility Project, and this project directly ties into that station accessibility project. So when that station is complete, that is one of the key components of ensuring that this project can then move to continue, and obviously want to be mindful and closely monitor any projects that could potentially intersect with or be near to the MBTA's own rail right-of-way. And so we're coordinating accordingly there. The next project is Swampscott's Rail Trail construction project. This project is being tagged as a potential delay risk, but is more so being tagged as a cost risk due to the years it has been since a new design milestone was achieved in project info. This is listing project review committee approval from December of 2019, and it's being tagged more because other trail projects within this part of the Boston region have also seen very sizable cost increases. For example, the Independence Greenway project in Peabody went from $14 to $22 million. The other section of the Independence Greenway was initially PRC'd at $2 million. Now it is $8 million. About a year ago, the Linfield Rail Trail had a very substantial increase in cost as well. So MPO staff are being very mindful of all trail projects that are on the tip that may incorporate different complexities into their design. In the case of this project, it's namely with regard to a bridge that is within the scope and the potential of a boardwalk. Not to draw comparisons here, but the Natick-Cochituate Rail Trail project is about 450 feet of trail. Most of it is a bridge, and that is about $11.5 million. This is a larger geographic area, so MPO staff are trying to closely monitor and be considerate of the fact that other comparable projects that are even smaller in scope may be more expensive. Not necessarily a guarantee here, but we're keeping a close eye on it. And also because of some of the wetlands that are being monitored as part of the boardwalk, overhead utilities near some of the crossings for the new bridge that would be incorporated in the project, we are keeping an eye on this project. Though it is worth noting we have heard support from abutters on the project. Large number of advocates along the trail have recommended that we keep it in place. We've also heard support from staff in the town of Marblehead that are starting to advance their own extension of the rail trail, which is a part of the Border to Boston Trail as well. So with that, we actually don't have any updates for fiscal 29 projects, so this brings us into our major capital projects update. There are 3 projects that are going to be listed here, starting off in order of their current advertisement year. So in this case, Somerville's McGrath Boulevard construction. At the December 19th meeting, MPO staff had indicated that a 25% design was submitted by MassDOT for the project back in, I believe, October of 2024. And that did include a revised cost estimate. The project's cost has increased from about an inflation-adjusted $97 million towards something closer to $128.4 million. At Readiness Days, the project was not recommended for a delay, though it was flagged as high risk by MassDOT for some Article 97 permitting, specifically with regard to a footbridge within the project area, which may or may not be phased out of the project and conducted as separate work. The discussions around the specific scope or component of the project are still underway between the city, MassDOT, and other different groups of residents. What I have illustrated here on screen, though, is a comparison between the current tip for 25-29 and the advanced construction spread for the project and the proposed new tip. Despite the cost increase on the project, there are no additional years being proposed to fund this project. The current tip had assumed that a $30 million a year, roughly spread, between federal fiscal years 27 and 29 would, in this tip, at that old cost estimate, only require $5 million of contribution by the MPO in 2030 to basically cap it off. In the 26-30 tip, based on the new cost estimate resulting from the 25% design, MPO staff are proposing a very similar funding spread, albeit with $35 million in federal fiscal year 2030. This fully funds the project with MPO target dollars at the revised cost estimate. It is worth noting that MassDOT received an approximately, I want to say, $40 43. Brad's nodding his head. $43 million grant from the Reconnected Communities Program from USDOT. And with match included, that is a fully burdened figure of $53.75 million. Now, this grant would need to be obligated by federal fiscal year 2028. However, as with a lot of uncertainty now around the availability of federal funding, programming scenarios do not currently incorporate this grant, as despite its award, the eligibility or incorporation of this grant is not yet entirely confirmed. As a result, trying to incorporate it into programming scenarios could present a lot of risk should anything take place or happen. So we have flagged this project as a high risk, namely with regard to that yet to be determined flag on that Reconnecting Communities grant. That's something that I'm sure will be coming up over the coming months and very much still is being worked out. On the next slide, this takes us into 28. We have the rehabilitation of Western Avenue in Lynn. There is no cost change proposed on this project here between the 25 and 29 tip and the new tip. It is currently listed at $15 million in 2028, $20 million in 2029. And last year we had anticipated and are fulfilling this year an approximately $11 million contribution in federal fiscal year 2030. This project is being flagged as high risk because of how, due to the age of the cost estimate. The project was initially funded in the federal fiscal years 23-27 tip, but was PRC approved and is still at a PRC approval stage without a 25% design back in December of 2018. That is about 6.2 years since that last estimate. The project is also not listed in the LRTP, but is approaching a very similar cost scale, and given the age of the cost estimate, should the 25% design come in, and there would be, let's just hypothetically, a fairly sizable increase percentage-wise, that would have a very substantial financial impact on the tip. This is kind of an example of the program risk I was referring to earlier in this presentation. In a very similar vein, on the next slide, we have the reconstruction of Rutherford Avenue. There will be two slides we'll be covering this here because I do not have the full funding spread of Rutherford on this screen. So again, the City of Boston is recommending a federal fiscal year 29 delay with a 25% expected December 2025. I believe the current ad year based on the schedule is around June of 2029. This would take the project from an anticipated spread of $33.5 million in 2028, $45 million in 2029, and $35.5 million in 2030, down to $33.5 million in each of 2029 and 2030. So this proposed scenario is doing two things. One, it is delaying the project back 1 year to a 2029 ad date, but it is also reducing the amount of funding in one of the years. So last year when we were developing the tip, to be proactive, the MPO board voted to increase the amount of funding for Rutherford in 29. In this case, MPO staff are recommending a reduction back down to 33.5, which is a net decrease for this project in the range of about $46 million overall between the 3-year spread here. The project cost estimate has not changed, however, and really what this is related to is sort of again to that program risk. The more funding that is at the first few years of the project, should the project see a delay, the more disruptive that is as that figure moves between different years of the tip. And this is best illustrated on the next slide, less so for projects that are currently on the tip, but more for prospective projects for the tip. So assuming the most recent schedule for the project continues to hold, that the cost estimate for the project of about $200 million, which is inflation adjusted, the cost estimate that is on project info is about 178, I want to say. Rutherford Avenue's advanced construction schedule is shown on screen here. Based on the 2630 tip being proposed here today, that's $33.5 million in 29, $33.5 in 2030, $44 million starting in next year's tip, or I should say the tip development cycle will be reviewing a year from now in 2031, $44.75 million in 2032, and in 2033 the project will be fully funded at $42 million. Thus, after this programming scenario, in order to fully fund the Rutherford Avenue project across a 5-year spread, there will be a need to program $130.76 million additional dollars. It's worth noting as well that with this delay of Rutherford Avenue, the project is now fully contained within the next time band of the Long Range Transportation Plan from 2029 to 2033. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, there are some projects that are on the LRTP and not yet currently on the TIP that are approaching 25% design, and there are others that are currently funded in fiscal 26 to be designed. I'll also note here that in 2032, the return of grant anticipation notes or debt service for the Next Generation Bridge program for MassDOT are anticipated to start again. We do not know the extent to which this may reduce MPO regional target funding availability, but it will reduce MPO regional target funding availability compared to if we didn't have the debt service. What this is basically to say is that in future TIP development cycles, MPO staff will be working with this committee to much more closely monitor funding availability to support the project going forward, assuming a 5-year funding spread. A larger spread could be possible, though that is the subject of potential discussion. That covers the totality of major infrastructure projects. On the next slide, this is a table that we had illustrated back in December that kind of teased out what 2030 might look like based on what our expected funding spreads would be. And on the next slide in today's numbers, this is what we're currently looking at for February of 2025. For new projects, we think that after accounting for some of these changes, some rebalancing of advanced construction between 2029 and 2030, and that project design set aside of about $3 million, which is being introduced in this new scenario here, we have about $49.37 million in fiscal 2030. That can be used to program new projects, that can be used to program delays for projects if necessary. But the bottom line to revisit this on the next slide is that across 6 years of the TIP, we have a surplus of funding in 2025 that would likely be addressed, and I'm happy to discuss this further, by a TIP amendment rather than as part of a programming scenario. That amendment would include a full 21-day public comment period, I'll note. It includes a surplus in 2026 to be addressed as part of these scenarios, and also deficits in 27 and 28 to be addressed as part of these scenarios. So, we're about to go into discussion, so some key takeaways here. So, there's some good news. We have had, basically as MPO staff and also with our project proponents in this committee, an extra 2 months of information gathering and coordination than we had when we attempted to develop the TIP and readiness scenarios last year. We are better equipped. With that said, the challenge this year is also greater, financially speaking, than it was last year. If we can actually go back to the prior slide, just put a number on it, the funding that is available, or I should say the funding deficit in fiscal 27 and 28 is approximately $100 million. The funding available in 29 and 2030 is approximately $55 million. So the deficits in the middle years of the TIP exceed the funding available should we only seek to utilize delays in the later years of the TIP, which was a strategy that was employed last year. We can go back to the next slide again, thank you. What I'm trying to emphasize here is that there is still the possibility that some additional difficult conversations are going to be had as to which projects, if any, may need to be removed from the TIP if possible or delayed back due to financial reasons rather than readiness reasons. As I've also mentioned throughout this presentation, further cost increases are likely to emerge over the coming months, especially if municipalities start making 25% design submissions in March. Again, all of that information will be conveyed to this committee and also the MPO board as part of the scenario development process, but that is going to change the programming scenarios as we continue to discuss them. I would advise, as I mentioned during materials, that in addition to just looking at these scenarios now, this committee not only reconsiders the TIP cost change committee recommendations from 2021, to borrow a term from somebody else, the grace period from when these recommendations were put into effect back in September 2021 has, functionally after 4 years likely concluded, but also potentially investigate any revisions to these policies or an expansion of these policies that could be more specific. For example, the policy around preferences for 25% design, instead of having a design milestone, could be made more specific to say that it requires a cost estimate that is timely by X months. or that the project proponent must provide a certain cadence of updates and cost estimates to be on the tip. Just putting that out there, we will likely discuss that over the coming tip committee meetings as we revise these readiness proposals. Moving on to the next slide, just for some key considerations. As I just mentioned, last year's tip strategy for developing 25-29 balanced the priorities of funding new projects on the tip and then delaying some currently funded projects to resolve funding deficits. Currently, it does not seem that there's sufficient target funding to emulate a balanced strategy this year, as the MPO board opted to do last year, based on our current understanding. Things are subject to change. I'll also reiterate, compared to last year, we have more project applications in the pipeline, and many of these projects are at further levels of design, not only in the projects that were funded last year and in prior years, but even some projects that are currently on the tip. I'll also again reiterate that there are projects in that 29-33 time band of the LRTP that are starting to attempt to enter the tip and provide applications there. Also important to note again, the cost increases may still emerge, and one of the things that I would like to note is that attempting to very quickly address this deficit issue in fiscal 27 may not be entirely effective, as when new cost estimates come through, the goalposts as to what is and is not fiscal constraint is likely to shift, and that may continue to shift until a final tip is endorsed in June. So again, we're going to stay posted here, and any strategy that is employed should attempt to incorporate, at staff's recommendation, some contingencies to account for things that are not yet to be known. Staff are going to work to try to turn what is unknown into what is known. And again, not to be dour, but a lot of the challenges that we've witnessed over the past few years of tip development have also taken place during a relatively plentiful time for federal funding. As part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, when we were developing the 23-27 tip, moving from the 22-26 tip, we saw funding increases for regional target of about 20%. Then in developing the 24-28 tip from the 23-27 tip, we saw a further compounding 12% on top of that from the grant anticipation notes. As I mentioned earlier, starting in 2032, so not the tip we'll be doing next year, but the 1-2 years from now, GANs will be returning, likely at a smaller level than it previously was at, but still returning nonetheless, which means that in essence, future tips may have fewer funding resources to work with than current ones. So as we go into the discussion on the next slide, I just want to kind of organize discussion into 3 main areas. For one, what are some of the near-term challenges that this committee will look to address with the MPO board for the 26 and 30 tip? And also, as we look ahead to the 27-31 tip or the 28-32 tip, how is this near-term strategy going to impact the development of those tips when it's a year from now, basically? Also, beyond those tips, as we think about the next LRTP and future tips even beyond 2028, what are the long-term implications of some of the near-term challenges for the next couple of years as well? So I know there was a lot of information here. I am happy to go back to any slides if folks have questions, and I'm happy to open the floor to discussion now, after a whole lot of talking.
Thank you, Ethan. Thanks. This is an incredible amount of work to get us to this point, and all the information and coordination and engagement you've done, and Joanna and MPO staff, so thank you. I will now open it up for discussion. And I see Eric has a...
Yeah, Ethan, thank you. Take another drink, wet the whistle. That was a lot of information. Even for somebody who follows this closely, it's a lot. So many projects that are, having, this has just been the trend that are increasing in cost and not ready and getting pushed out. This is such a juggling act. My question is for 2025 in the near term. We have 25 million, correct, that is freed up in 2025. And I'm just wondering, those are projects that really need to be advertised by September, correct?
Yes, so any project that is a highway project would need to be advertised by September 30th. On the subject of transit projects, there is also a key distinction there. FTA, I believe, at the MARPA meeting requested that any FTA flexes would need to be conducted by May. Therefore, just to kind of take your question, run with it for a little bit, MPO staff are going to be recommending that the amendment for the federal fiscal years 2025 to 29 tip that would incorporate the delays of those projects out of fiscal 25 be conducted in early March, potentially as early as the March 6th MPO meeting, which is before this committee will start discussing scenarios. That way, a full 21-day public comment period could be captured, endorsed on April 3rd, and then that way there would be sufficient time, or at least we hope sufficient time, to submit a tip action to FTA inclusive of these updates. So that is staff's current understanding, so that we are not in a use it or lose it situation with this $25 million. We're continuing to work with MassDOT on this. I'll also note we have been in touch with the regional transit authorities and the MBTA, taking the projects that they had applied for fiscal 26 and determining which ones could be accelerated into fiscal 25. FTA Flex does allow for much more flexibility as far as year of advertising date versus the highway projects there. But the deadline to conduct that FTA Flex in time for 2025 is earlier than a roadway project would be.
So we're looking probably to take an action on this before we develop the tip.
Precisely, yes. But it would just be for 2025. It would not impact other years of the tip per se. I will note as well, and again, we can get into more discussion of this in future scenario meetings. There are some project applications this year by the regional transit authorities that do build upon applications that they submitted last year. So to that end, some of these are building upon existing contracts that may already be in place for some of them. So there are some projects that are, to my understanding, fairly neat to pull up, at least contractually speaking. But I'm also not an employee of the federal government, so I don't know that for sure.
Thanks, Ethan. Any other questions? Discussion? Len?
Well, it is a lot to think about, and yeah, I'm just going to need to review, your deck and probably the recording of this presentation, in order to really wrap my head around all that was said. It's very clear. I mean, it's just a lot. I mean, if I was reading it, I'd have to reread it again to make sure that I have a sense of everything. But a general question is, do you think that what we are doing, the new policy that we put in place in 21, is having an effect on the number of delays and the nature of the delays? I mean, I thought the analysis that you did of the number of projects that were delayed in, the various tips, and the year in which those delays happened, and the kind of projects that, or the projects that were delayed repeatedly was really interesting. Did any pattern pop out to you?
So something I will mention, I have not done a full rundown on this, so I don't have any numbers to speak to, but a large cross-section of those projects that are either repeatedly seeing delays, or are maybe they're delayed 1 year, they're not the next year, but then the year after. Many of those projects actually predate the cost committee policies and were incorporated into tips back in 2020. So for the federal fiscal year 2020 to 24 tip, for example.
Yeah.
For that reason, to be blunt, there is a large cost section of projects that have functionally been grandfathered in, and that those policies the policies that are already being enforced, I should say, have not yet really applied to. So the 25% design threshold, for example, was applied for new projects, not retroactively applied for currently programmed projects back 4 years ago. Which is to say, to me, at least from my read on the situation, it's not so much the impact that the policies are having on the projects, more that these projects are sort of policy agnostic, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no.
Currently.
Yeah, I get that, but it's not like we're seeing projects that are programmed at 25%. When they get 75% design, maintain like the level of cost that we expect, right? It seems like that jump from 25 to 75% is often a large increase and kind of random, huh? I'm not really seeing any pattern in the nature of the projects that show like a big increase in cost.
Each project is, I mean, this is kind of a cop-out, but each project is unique.
Yeah, of course.
But that is part of why MPO staff have incorporated the year since last update field here, and why it may be wise. The 25% design threshold is, I think, a healthy benchmark, but it's also important to note that and anybody who is currently developing a project for the TIP can likely speak to this, but what 25% design meant 4 years ago is different from what 25% design means now in terms of what steps have to be taken to advance the project and attain that approval. And in some cases, we also saw projects on here that had a 25, but then had to resubmit one or more times to do so. I think, have a project that doesn't have an impact this year, or is not recommended for delay this year, but I think we have a project in fiscal 25 that has 2 or 3 plan specification and estimate submissions. That's after 100% design. So it differs from project to project for sure. And part of what I think this committee will benefit from discussing is investigating ways that, rather than having milestone level thresholds for incorporating projects, looking more at communication-based thresholds. Like one of the things I mentioned on an earlier slide was a new cost estimate annually could achieve the spirit or the intent of that recommendation, while also being a little bit more timely and also not as subject to changing goalposts, for example. Like I said, 25% design doesn't mean what it meant 4 years ago, but the policy is the same.
I'm going to ask one more quick follow-up on this topic, and then I'm going to shut up so that Josh can get in here and talk. But the annual update, if a municipality doesn't have the ability to do the necessary design work, like to go from 25% to 75%, then how will they be able to give us the update? Because it seemed like there's some cases where like town meeting wasn't granting the money to do the design work. I'm just wondering about the feasibility. When they're at 25%, to give us the update when it seems like they're not even able to do the work that would give us information. That's it. And I'll put my hand down. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't want to editorialize that, but I agree that it would definitely have to be strongly considered by this committee what the next step would be if a project is unable to advance due to insufficient local design resources.
Okay.
And what the programming result should be. So.
All right. Gotcha. Thank you.
Josh.
Hey, folks. Thank you for that great presentation, Ethan. I know how much work went into it. I have a question, something that Josh at the MBTA, were advised of, and I wonder if this bears on any of the timing that's being considered, which is, does Region 1 have to approve TIP amendments? What is the time frame for that? Does that need to be factored in, if that's accurate, before or after the final vote is taken? Presumably there'd be an early April vote on whatever March 6th amendment is offered. So I think you get where I'm going.
Yes, so as far as logistics go, we are still, our contact at FTA Region 1 is currently having much more fun than I think we are. She's on vacation. So we're going to work that out once she has returned, but we're currently still working with folks at MassDOT to figure out if the logistics of even conducting this amendment are currently feasible. Nothing has been set through the agenda setting process right now for this. MPO staff are just identifying dates that we could potentially employ this to meet FTA's deadlines. And we're still hoping that when staff return from wherever they may be right now, that we can, figure out what works on FTA's schedule as well as MassDOT and the board's schedule.
Great. Thank you so much. I appreciate a lot of unknowns. So. Okay.
Thanks, Josh. Brad.
Thank you, Jen. Ethan, great job as always. Thank you to you and Adriana and their whole team. As we all work together to unpack these really, really tricky questions in one of our hardest ever tips, I am optimistic that we've received more information earlier in the process than we ever have before. And for anybody who's just tuning in, this has been a theme that this MPO has worked through for many, many years, and I want to give credit where credit's due. Thank you, Mass DOT staff, for opening up your books, partnering with MPO staff to try to reduce risk and improve transparency. That's what we've been all about these last few years. Ethan, one question that comes to my mind here is whether you and the Mass DOT and the proponent teams will be able to identify projects where scope has been added that contributes to time, risk, or money. There were a couple of projects that you listed there that for me kind of made it into my notes as like, this was a street project, and now it's a street project that has a bridge, for example. This was a street project, and now the street project is going to try to go an extra 4 blocks or an extra quarter mile. There may be legitimate reasons for those add scope decisions that each project proponent can articulate. But to me, that seems like something that this MPO should be cautious about. We do try to honor our commitments in LRTP and in previous tips. But when major scope elements are added to projects, I think we can have the adult conversation of like, is that the project we signed up for? And is it feasible potentially to have a smaller version in these times of extreme budget pressure? Thank you.
Tom, did you have something to add to that?
Yes, thanks, Jen. Ethan, thank you. Great presentation, but like everyone said, it was a lot to digest. But just to kind of echo what Brad just said, one of them, going back to the 21 committee, I was on that, when we made the recommendations. And, one of the issues back then was what we're seeing in front of us right now, how these projects keep growing after they've been presented to us and, we, voted for the projects. And then for whatever reason, the projects keep growing. And that was really one of the reasons behind that committee back then. It was to try to get, to send a message also, not only to whoever is proposing these projects, but a lot of the consultants that are designing these projects to stay within the budgets that were given to us. So that was the attempt back in 21. Now here we back are, in 25, and we're dealing with the same issues over and over again. And we did, want that grace period at the time because we felt it wouldn't be fair to create new rules for projects that have been, in the planning stage all along. So that's why, and maybe a fault of the committee, we didn't say, okay, the grace period ends in 2024. We kind of left it a little bit open, but I think the intention was 2 or 3 years. And then, we wanted projects to start coming in the way that they've been proposed to us. So just like Brad said, I saw that one project where all of a sudden we're doing a bridge now. I said, we've never done that before, things like that. So I think it's also for whoever's proposing these projects to understand that there is a limit to what we can do. So I just want to give a little background on that because there was a lot of discussion back in 21 because that, if I remember, the tip year right before that was a difficult year also. And we were trying to figure out a way of being fair, but also kind of holding people's feet to the fire as far as, once we've approved a project, and again, when you see resubmissions on projects that are after they've submitted 100%, to me, we shouldn't even be talking about it, but because again, they have to stay within the financial, agreements that we've had. But I just want to give a little background on that. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom. Anyone else have questions or items for discussion at this time? I know it was a lot to digest, and we will have more conversations coming up, both at the MPO, of course, and at future TIPper meetings. Len?
Yeah, so I guess my question, to you and Ethan is like, by when would you like answers to these questions? What do you need from us? To help you do the work that you need to do in whatever period of time you need to do it.
I appreciate the question. The draft tip is planned to be released at April 17th. So again, as I mentioned at the very start here, I mean, I would greatly appreciate it if members of this committee could review the tip cost change committee recommendations in advance of next week's MPO board meeting. These discussions are functionally going to be happening weekly starting in March. So whenever you feel best equipped to come to the MPO board with all of the information that you may need to make these decisions. There's plenty more meetings to go, plenty of opportunities to continue to hash this out, or so I hope. So.
One quick follow-up question. Are you having office hours still, or are you too busy for that?
I do still have office hours. If anybody would like to meet with me, I can provide the Google Calendar booking page for that. And I'm happy to meet with not just members of this committee, but also any other MPO board members, project proponents, etc. Thank you for mentioning that, Len. It's a good shout out for that office hours page.
Thanks. Because it's nice to know you have reserved time, and I can target that and then have. Okay, thank you.
Just wanted to echo that. Thanks to Ethan. That was something that members had requested at a previous meeting, and so really appreciate Ethan making that time, and also will offer my availability to talk through anything any other members would like to bring as well. I do see John, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Jen. Hey, Tom, I was on that committee with you. You were our fearless leader. It might be time to ask the chair of the MPO if we could resurrect the committee and have some of these projects come back and visit with us. Because I think you're right, they're starting to get out of control now. Although I do like the Wilmington one. It is down the street from my house. Just kidding, but no, in all seriousness, that's this is exactly what we were concerned about at the time. And now is probably the right time to start looking at it again.
I guess, can I say something, Chad?
Okay.
John, we don't need to resurrect that committee, right? We are the committee that's supposed to deal with that, right? Am I missing something?
Len, the chair created a subcommittee to kind of come up with those recommendations back in 21.
So you're saying like we need to change the recommendations, or because it seems like we're the committee that's supposed to deal with the aberrations, for lack of a better word, or the anomalies.
Yeah, from what I remember, again, it was like a subcommittee that went to before the full board, and then it was approved by the board. But it's stretching my memory a little bit, to be honest with you.
Okay, that's fine. All right. Thanks.
Eric.
Yes, I chaired that committee. That was over the summer, and we dug into this problem when it was first coming up. And I think the challenge is that there was always this hanging over was this idea that we would reevaluate projects, and we would use that kind of reevaluation to decide which ones were going to get moved out, which ones would stay. We said that it seems kind of objective sometimes if you move a project out 2 years versus one that could one that doesn't or stays. And we also even said that we might take projects off the tip,
right?
Or say to the proponents, look, we're not going to increase the budget, so you need to rescope your project. We've never done that, right. And I think the challenge is, just to be blunt, as Ethan said, a lot of the projects that continue to go up in cost and continue to get pushed out are projects that were on the tip before we did this. So unless we're willing to say to Boston, you know what, we're done with Rutherford, we're kicking it off the tip. Sorry, it's been on. It's like 10 years that it's been on this tip, and we keep pushing it off. I don't think we're going to do that to some of these other smaller projects. So it is a pickle that we're in, because this just keeps happening. But it's really challenging, because we could bring a committee together and we could talk about other policies, but we kind of what we kind of need to do is say, are we willing to just keep trying to work with people and figure this out and fund everything, or are we gonna start saying no to projects, or no to increases? And I agree with Ethan's point, is that every project is unique. Like, there are reasons why the cost went up, and I think it's really hard for the MPO, for us to say we're fine with this $5 or $10 million cost increase, but we're not with another one. So I'm just voicing what I think are just like the challenges here. But all around, this is just, it's a really difficult situation, and the fact that we keep having this funding free up, and we struggle to find projects to fund it, just is very aggravating. And it just feels like we are, it'd be interesting at some point to look at how many projects have we funded that have not really traditionally gone through our process, have not been scored, have sort of just come in, at the last minute, so to speak. Anyways.
Thanks, Eric. Ethan, did you have something in response before I run to John?
Yes, thank you, Eric. I do want to reiterate and actually expand upon something that Eric mentioned with regard to scoring. I'll start off by mentioning, one, something MPO staff is willing to do that we are not currently doing, and two, mention what we are currently doing. So for one of the other things that this TIP committee has the prerogative to do is request that MPO staff go to project proponents for specific projects here and bring them to the next committee meeting. That is March 13th. That is before the MPO board starts talking scenarios. So MPO staff can do that for specific projects. The TIP cost change committee recommendations also empowered members of the board, and by extension members of this committee theoretically, to make requests as to which projects should also come to the board and should they be rescored by MPO staff, in anticipation that members of this committee would ask for certain projects to be rescored, and also in recognition of several changes to the evaluation criteria over the past few years. I do not have a slide that currently shows this, but MPO staff are currently rescoring the Boylston Street project for the city of Boston, the Woburn Common project for the city of Woburn, Ashland's rehabilitation and crossing improvements on Cherry Street, and the intersection improvements at Route 1 and University Avenue and Everett Street. We are also evaluating, I forgot one, resurfacing and related work on Central and South Main Streets in Ipswich. And we are for the first time scoring Rutherford Avenue. The project was previously scored through the LRTP process, but never through the TIP process. The reason why MPO staff picked these projects is that they either had readiness changes last year, or each of these projects actually used a 134-point scoring system. So if we were to compare them to newer projects, those use a 100-point scoring system. So MPO staff are also trying to make it so that anything with an old score, not on the same framework, we can at least get the dust off and get it to be more like to like. So if there are any projects I did not mention, and I'm happy to send an email to members of this committee to reiterate those 6 projects, I will say we can attempt to score them, though there have been some changes to our scoring process this year that are currently limiting our ability to take in more projects. Specifically, the fact that project applications surged much higher than we anticipated, and that we received more transit transformation projects than we expected, have constrained our ability to rescore more than the about 6 or 10 we're looking at. We're also rescoring all the design pilot projects from last year that were not selected because we've made some criteria tweaks as well. But
Thank you, Ethan. I think that'll be, really helpful to make kind of what Eric was speaking to, of having being difficult to make that kind of decision around we're gonna fund this at cost increase, but not that. I think having the scores is a big component to allowing us to make some more informed decisions there. John.
Thanks, Jen. So a comment and a question. So the comment on the committee is that one thing that we are doing, which I think is really good, and I think Ethan does a great job at this, is forcing the proponents to tell us why the cost has increased. I haven't sat on this board for at least 15 years or more, and Tom, Eric, you can attest to this. We used to just say, oh, the price went up. Does anybody know why? Well, I don't know, not really sure, but now we get a very detailed, in most cases, extremely detailed reason as to why. And again, I'm not sure if we would ever say to somebody, well, sorry, we don't like that, but at least we know. And then many times there's, whether or not, adding a bridge to the Wilmington one is a good reason, at least we know that it's not just, they decided to increase the price, right? We know exactly where the money's going. And I think that's good. I think that's very helpful to know that. So there is a big change. We did not get that before that committee required that. The question I had is, and Ethan, I'm sorry, I don't remember the project name, but one of the projects towards the end, you said it's been on for something like 6.2 years, and there hasn't been a cost estimate updated since its initial thing. I forget which project that was. Maybe you can remember that.
Yes, so I do want to emphasize that was the Western Avenue project in Lynn.
Yeah.
I did mention that in the slides because it is a large cost. I do encourage members to look at all of the projects on the readiness scenario because that is not the only project at a 6-year. There's a couple others, and I believe there's a sizable number of projects in the 3 to 6 year range as well. So staff did not have time to create a full graph that could illustrate that, but I believe MassDOT actually might have something internally in Highway Division, but I need to talk with folks to see if we could pull that. But yes, there are definitely other projects, and I don't want to single any out, but Western Ave was the project that I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, just thinking of that one that's like more than 6 years without a real cost estimate. Like we're holding 45 million, but God knows what that real number is, and it's gonna cause problems later down the line. We would think we would want a more realistic number on, or say we're not gonna keep you on the tip if we don't get some realistic number, because we know that's just a disaster waiting to happen. Because we know that number can't be real if it's 6 years old. Just a thought. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Brad.
Jen, this is a great discussion, and I know we're past time, so I'll keep it quick. As we think about our work going forward, I definitely want to make sure that folks are not just looking for the easy way out here. Short-term solutions and band-aids, identifying scapegoat projects that happen to be those big $30 million a year projects like Western Ave, Rutherford, and McGrath may feel like a little bit of an easy way out. But all of those have gone through rigorous processes, whether they were 10 years ago, 5 years ago, or 1 month ago. So let's make sure that we do the due diligence across the board. I'm really glad that the last 5 minutes of discussion referenced the scoring process, because despite our long meeting, that actually hadn't been part of the staff presentation earlier. So it's not a knock on the staff presentation. It's just a reminder, we have a merit-based process where we try to look at multimodal benefit, consistency with state and local policy to actually score projects. So I'm really pleased, Ethan, to hear that staff are going to be able to allocate some time for projects that haven't been scored or still have needs for refresh. That'll be very helpful to the board in the hard conversations ahead. John just mentioned responsiveness and transparency. That's another really important thing. You, Jen, and we as a committee have built this culture now that folks can come in and not just feel like they need to advocate and parade a bunch of positive comments in, and yet responsiveness matters a lot. And the ability for MPO staff to get feedback from project proponents, whether DOT, MBTA, or cities and towns, really should be an indicator for all of us. Is a project for real? Are folks actually moving things forward? And then the last thing I just want to add to the conversation, we touched on it a couple of times with Malden and Chelsea today as specific examples. municipal prioritization in communities that have multiple TIP-funded projects on the tip is a legitimate conversation that we should all have. And I actually thought it was really cool, Ethan, that you described Malden saying, hey, maybe this project over here is not the key priority. Maybe this other one is. Let's make sure that we continue to keep that culture going of transparency. Chelsea said something a little different. We're concerned about too much construction in too small of a geography. Let's work together on construction or logistics. And there may be times where we, as a board, have to ask our members, which one of these is your top priority, given our tight constraints. So great work, everybody. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Brad. All right. And you didn't reference that we are quite a bit over time. Anyone else have comments, suggestions, anything you'd like to bring before the next, I guess we meet again at the MPO meeting on Thursday?
We are over time, so I'll save it. But I do have more I want to say, but I'm definitely going to save it.
All right. Well, we all have a lot to look through. Ethan, I do appreciate you specifically noting what our homework is of reading through that the previous kind of current policy that we have and thinking through what tools are available, through that, and then what we might need additionally, whether this cycle or going forward. With that, is there a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Reluctantly, I make that motion.
I'll second it.
All right. I had a motion from Len and a second from Eric. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you,
meeting.
everyone.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.